Edwin Howard Armstrong was born in Manhattan on December 18, 1890 to John Armstrong and Emily Smith. When he was 8 years old, he contracted a disease called St. Vitus's dance, which gave him a lifelong tic that occurred when he became too excited or stressed out. Due to the disease, Armstrong stayed out of school for 2 years. During the years he was taken out of school, he developed an interest in electrical and mechanical devices, as shown by him fiddling around with a radio antenna tower in his backyard. Armstrong went to Columbia University, the same university in which he would later become a professor of electrical engineering. In 1917, he joined the U.S. Army Signal Corps as a captain and was sent to Paris to set up a wireless communication system for the Army. He also shared his patents with the U.S. military, giving the Allied Party an instrumental advantage that aided them in winning both world wars. As a young adult, he spent time in his parents' attic inventing the regenerative circuit, the super-heterodyne receiver, and the super-regenerative circuit. In his junior year at Columbia in 1914, he invented the regenerative circuit, which amplified a signal through the use of vacuum tubes, making a long-distance communication a possibility. However, another prominent inventor, Lee DeForest, came across the same idea 2 years later, selling the patent rights to AT&T. This led to a legal battle that escalated all the way up to the Supreme Court. The science community knew that Armstrong invented the regenerative circuit 2 years before DeForest. They knew that Armstrong understood how DeForest's invention, the Audion, worked better than the inventor himself, as shown by writing a paper detailing his discovery that the Audion transmitted radio signals as well as detecting and amplifying them. However, a misunderstanding in the Supreme Court caused DeForest to be credited with inventing the regenerative circuit, despite the backlash from the science community. While the legal battles were in procession, Armstrong kept innovating and worked on the super-heterodyne receiver, which got rid of the need for tuning controls on a radio, along with the super-regenerative circuit, inspired by Armstrong's service as a signal officer during World War I. In 1923, Armstrong married Marion McInnes, the secretary of the president of the RCA, David Sarnoff. Armstrong gifted her with a portable super-heterodyne that he built for her. In the 1930s, Armstrong also sought to get rid of the static problem found in AM radios, despite renowned engineers such as John Renshaw Carson, the inventor of a single sideband modulation, thinking that was impossible. I have proved mathematically that this type of modulation inherently distorts without any compensating advantages whatsoever. Static like the poor will always be with us. Armstrong counters this by saying, "I can never accept findings based almost exclusively on mathematics. It ain't ignorance that causes all the trouble in this world. It's the things people know ain't so." Slaving away at Columbia's Philosophy Hall, he came up with the idea of frequency modulation, or FM for short. Instead of altering the amplitude, it altered the frequency, making it less prone to interference by outside factors, such as thunder and lightning. When Sarnoff requested Armstrong to work for the RCA, he was impressed with the idea of FM radio, but this technology conflicted with Sarnoff's company, which supported AM radio. Seeking to kill FM radio to protect his business, Sarnoff persuaded the FCC to have the FM spectrum moved from 42 to 50 MHz to 88 to 108 MHz, rendering Armstrong's Yankee network and all FM radio sets obsolete. AT&T also supported this because the Yankee network stations would have to buy wired links from them due to the loss of FM stations. To make things worse, the RCA and NBC were using FM technology without royalties and persuaded other companies to do the same. Of course, this led to a series of lawsuits that made Armstrong's fortune disappear like heat from Jimmy Carter's house. Financially drained and mentally destroyed by his legal battles between him and the RCA, Armstrong snaps and chases his wife with a fireplace poker, hitting her on the arm. She responds by leaving and staying with her sister in Connecticut. On January 31, 1954, Armstrong loses hope of FM becoming accepted and jumps from the 13th floor of his apartment in New York, fully clothed. The New York Times describes his 2-page suicide note and quotes, "He was heartbroken at being unable to see her once again, and expressing deep regret at having hurt her, the dearest thing in his life." The note closes with, "God keep you and Lord have mercy on my soul." One of his friends estimates that 90% of his waking hours were spent fighting against the RCA. David Sarnoff hears about this and tells the press, "I did not kill Armstrong." The radio industry was one of the only industries that flourished during the Great Depression, with broadcasters making up to $2 billion a year. Yet Armstrong didn't get nearly as much credit as he deserved due to his ideas being plundered by dishonest people. But following his tragic death, his wife begins to litigate against the RCA and other opponents and wins $10 million in compensation. This sets the gears in motion between FM becoming more widely accepted. However, Armstrong's work still took a few more years to get noticed. When television started to gain popularity, people began to appreciate the clear difference between AM and FM. Radios had both AM and FM bands beginning in the late 1950s. During the 1960s, the FCC approved of an FM broadcast standard and required broadcasters who owned AM and FM stations to program each of them with separate programming. In the 1970s, FM officially became larger than AM. Today, we now see over 2,000 FM stations and radios in our cars and in our homes. If Armstrong didn't prematurely die of suicide, he could have seen the slowly growing popularity of FM and its use for communications between NASA and astronauts that landed on the moon. Speaking of the moon, Armstrong was able to bounce FM signals off the moon, something AM signals couldn't do. Due to Armstrong's efforts in creating modern radio, he received 42 different patents, the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers Medal of Honor, the French Legion of Honor, the 1941 Franklin Medal, the 1942 Edison Medal, and he is currently a member of National Inventors Hall of Fame and the International Telecommunication Union's roster of great inventors. He currently rests at Locust Grove Cemetery in Massachusetts, doing the exact opposite of turning over in his grave. As you can see, not only did Armstrong's fortune and life disappear because of Sarnoff, but also his fame attributed to the invention of FM radio. And when I say his fame was tarnished, this is the average reaction you'd get from somebody if you asked someone who Edwin Armstrong was, even though he was responsible for the FM radio that everybody listens to today.
We'll check in with these two later.
All of this is going to beg the question, what does this have to do with today? This is relevant today because patent wars are still a huge problem. Let's take Samsung and Apple, the inventors of the Galaxy and the iPhone, respectively. Back in 2012, Samsung was accused of stealing many features from the iOS system, and it ended with Apple being awarded almost $1 billion in damages from Samsung. Just last year, they found themselves in yet another patent war. Apple accused Samsung of stealing 5 patents from them, and Apple looked for $2 billion in restitution. These patents were the ability to recognize certain phrases and add links, a universal search feature, data synchronization among multiple devices, the ability to unlock a device by performing a gesture, and the technology used for autocorrect. Yes, the same thing that causes this kind of thing to happen. Samsung also accused Apple of infringing 2 of their patents, which include camera and photo organization technology and video transmission technology. Anywho, the verdict was that Samsung owed Apple $119 million, a far cry from the $2 billion that Apple asked for. This was because Samsung only infringed upon 3 out of the 5 patents, and it was found that Apple also infringed upon one of Samsung's patents. Unfortunately, stolen ideas aren't exclusively a problem of the past, otherwise this wouldn't be seen before every movie.